We've been talking about your listening architecture, but what tools do you need in order to gather your customer insights?
How do you make customer experience very personal and the collection of data very personal? And particularly, how do you get the right technology that allows you to be very personal?
Let's talk technology and what's available to help you listen to your customers on this episode of the CX Leader Podcast.
The CX Leader Podcast with Steve Walker is produced by Walker, a business consulting firm that helps our clients unlock the potential of their customer experiences by placing the customer at the heart of all their business decisions. You can find out more at walkerinfo.com.
Hello, I'm Steve Walker, Chairman and CEO of Walker Information and also the host of the CX Leader Podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode where we explore the topics and themes to help CX leaders like you leverage all the benefits of your customer experience and help your customers and prospects want to do more business with you. Over the last couple episodes, we've been talking about the importance of having a solid listening architecture in order to critically listen to what your customers have to say about your business. Today, we're going to be talking about the foundation of that architecture, and that's the technology that you can use to gather those insights. I'm very pleased to be joined in this episode via Zoom by Dr. Kyle Groff, Senior Principal for Global CX Strategy and also our partner at Qualtrics, the leading technology company in the field of research and technology. So Kyle, thanks for being with us on this episode of the CX Leader Podcast.
Yeah, great to be here, Steve.
Yeah, we were just together in Chicago a couple days ago. It's good to be back with you. You know, you have a great history, and I maybe ask just for our audience, maybe you just give us a little bit of your background so people know where you've come from and sort of how you've built up your CX pedigree.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I've been at Qualtrics now for going on 4 years.
Wow, you're a veteran there then, huh?
I think I've been with Qualtrics longer than 90% of the company at this point. Prior to the time, I was on the client side, so I joined as a user of Qualtrics. I ran customer experience research for JetBlue Airways for a few years prior to joining Qualtrics. Before that, I worked for the U.S. Navy, and I was running a B2B style CX program there. So, think about getting feedback from companies like Boeing and Lockheed and making sure that we had a really good relationship going there. And since I've been with Qualtrics, what I do now is I take a lot of what I learned as a practitioner and I try to take it to companies that we work with to really understand what are companies trying to accomplish out there and how can we make sure that we have the right technology solution to meet those needs.
So you've come from the client side, and your two stops creates a vision in my head about how complex some of these relationships are. But now that you've been on the technology side for the last 4 years, why don't you just kind of compare and contrast where we were 5 years ago from where we are today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Steve. And this is something I think about constantly. I think when I actually worked on the client side, I got to see it, very kind of practical firsthand because I had needs, right? I had certain things that my executives were telling me, we need to get feedback from social media, or we need to get better at analytics, or this or that. But really what I've seen change from my time as a practitioner now working with the technology vendor in Qualtrics is the biggest change, in my opinion, is really the way that companies are going out and engaging with their customers. So if I think 5, especially 10 years ago, I think a lot of the way that CX programs are set up from a technology perspective is they were very limited. And so what they really had to do was leverage this kind of standard practice market research. Once a year, we're going to go out and blast emailed surveys, or in some cases, we're going to go out and mail surveys. I in fact still get that from some healthcare providers that send me a paper survey, even in 2018. But it was technology, I think, really limited what a program could do from a lot of the kind of strategy and methodology perspective, which is where you guys, really focus. And so if you flash forward to where we are today, what I'm seeing is companies now have the tools and the technology that exists to allow them to go out and really start to engage customers in a way that they want to be engaged, to have conversations on the customer's own terms.
You start to highlight, but where are some of the themes that you see if we project forward, say, into the next 5 years? What are going to be the big drivers of the technology?
Yeah, so I would start just reiterating the theme I just talked about, and I'd probably maybe formalize that a little bit more, is there's a lot of companies that are out there right now that understand sending a mass survey out to their customers maybe isn't the best way to collect feedback. And it's something I always like to say is just because you collect data doesn't make it useful, right? So making sure that it's actually valid data and that you're getting a representative sample. And to do those things, I think you really have to adhere to me, what is kind of the prime theme in all of this, which is how do you make customer experience very personal and the collection of data very personal? And particularly, how do you get the right technology that allows you to be very personal, right? And so examples of that might be using an SMS survey, right? That feels like you're just talking to a friend, using that in place of a, kind of a draconian emailed survey that comes over the top of an experience that already happened and asks 60 questions. Instead, maybe you want to ask something that is actually part of their experience, right? I think Uber does a really good job of this. It's just kind of embedded in the experience. It feels like you're just having a conversation. I take Uber a lot, I travel a lot, and I always do the star rating at the end because to me, it's just part of the experience, right? They understand how I want to provide feedback as a consumer, and they're very good at doing that. Another example that I've started to see more and more is how do you leverage kind of multiple types of technology and integrate those with one another to improve the engagement for your customers. And I'll give an example of this. Something we've actually tested with some customers and we found really good results with is this idea of making a smart survey. So think of this as using text analytics combined with a traditional survey. And it feels like a conversation. It's not a chat bot necessarily, and it's not an SMS survey necessarily, but it's almost a blending of those two to make it, just as we're having a conversation here, wouldn't it be great if you could leverage technology to be very conversational with your customers? And that's something that I think is just in its infancy right now. But 5 years from now, I would be surprised if we don't see most companies out there using some form of this natural conversation technology.
Yeah, actually, when we were together earlier this week, we surveyed informally in our group. And I think you came up with the companies that were represented there, I think we're leveraging 6.5 on average different listening posts. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was actually about 9, right? And this is in the B2B space, which, a lot of organizations in B2B look at themselves as maybe late to the game or trailing what's being done on B2C.
Yeah.
My experience, to be quite honest, is actually the opposite. Like I get most excited about working with B2B companies because I think it's such a clear connection with their customers. Every account is so important.
Right.
Yeah, you've got, you're going out there and you're talking to through 9 different channels to your customers, and potentially none of those channels are on the same platform or talk to one another.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I think then the follow-up question was how many people had all 9 of their sources on one platform, and there were 0 that had that.
Yeah, and to me, that's pretty common practice.
Yep.
But imagine being on the back end of that, and we've probably all been. Steve, I'm sure you have. I interact with a lot of brands, and it's not uncommon to get multiple contacts from the same brand, and it's not really their fault. It's probably 2 different teams within that company, and they don't understand who's talking to the customers and at what point.
Yeah, and with a tool like we're talking about here that you could put all those disparate listening sources into one tool, that's the way you're going to coordinate it. So, you have the opportunity to say, put your SMS text survey data together with some of your text verbatim surveys and find insights out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting it all into one space, everyone's trying to get there. I think you see it a lot with the CRM space and what's been going on there for the last 5 or 10 years, the rise of Salesforce.com. Everybody's trying to get a really holistic understanding of what their customers look like. And for the longest time, tools didn't really exist in that space. And I would say, maybe more from your world you've seen is oftentimes companies aren't necessarily aligned internally or don't have the culture to have kind of a centralized hub. To me, that's where it's going, is getting all these interactions with your customers to be very personal, making sure that you understand the end-to-end experience and have a tool that allows you to do that. But then from there, I think it branches into the second theme that I'm seeing and what's really driving not just our technology roadmap as a company, but what I'm seeing other companies come to the realization is they've got to make their generation of insights as seamless as possible. So it's moving away from this very reactive way of analyzing data, which is, again, aligns with typical market or old school market research principles of let's just go out there and blast our customers, pull together this massive report. We send it out to the company once a year. And after a year or two of doing that, people just stop listening. So I think making insights more real time, making it more efficient, and getting tools into the hands of your company so you can almost democratize the production of insights. There's not a lot of companies doing it today, but I think that's where it's going.
Yeah, you mentioned Uber, but for our audience, do you have some examples of where you've seen some cutting edge stuff going on in the B2B space?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of large telcos that I've worked with, and both these telcos basically follow the map that we're talking about here. So this isn't like we're just making this up. And Steve, you and I see this stuff all the time. There's real companies that are going through this today, right? There's real individuals out there that are putting their careers on the line to make bets about what their program can deliver to the organization. And I've worked with they're two of the largest telcos in not just the US, but in the world. And they've gone through this very typical roadmap of had a technology stack, didn't really allow them to engage customers in the right way. And because of that, they weren't getting the right data. Because they didn't have the right data, they couldn't produce the insights that they needed to, right? So by following kind of this path of let's figure out how our customers want us to engage with them, make sure we have the technology to do that, that's allowed them to pull together insights to where now their program has gone completely away from this very reactive, hey, somebody reached out to our call center, had a bad experience, let's close the loop. You still have to do that part, but what's it allowed them to do now is leverage some of the more predictive technology. And this is really where the future is going is how do you take past customer behavior, analyze all that behavior, and then allow you to produce models that you can layer on new customers. So somebody that's in there, for example, here's a good example from one of the telcos I worked with. They knew there was a flashpoint at the 18-month mark of being a customer, where if this customer had had any interaction with the support center in their first 18 months, they were very likely to attrit at the 18 to 24 month mark. So now what they could do is they can actually set flags, right, in the customer database. And they could say, if this customer has reached out to our support center, we know before the 18-month mark, we need to go out and actually interact with this customer and make sure that their experience has been seamless after the fact, right? And to me, that's really hitting the bottom line right there.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head. Hey, my guest this week on the CX Leader podcast is Dr. Kyle Groff, who's the Senior Principal for Global CX Strategy at Qualtrics. And he's really giving us some tremendous insights into how your architecture, how you design your CX listening can really enhance things on the back end. And just to kind of summarize, you've talked about engaging customers on their terms, creating it not to be sort of an annual event, but a fluid, dynamic conversation that is part and parcel, particularly in the B2B space, of sort of how you manage the relationship. And then finally getting to the point where you can be predictive based and apply those rules across to other companies and other customers. Kyle, if I'm a CX leader out there and I've got a legacy system that doesn't really do some of these things that we're talking about, sort of the broader vision of where I think you and I see this place going, what's one or two things that are places where they might want to start, I guess, build a better blueprint for their architecture?
Yeah, so what I would recommend for a company that's in that position is, and again, Steve, this, it's hard to detangle the technology from the kind of the thought leadership and consulting side, because one really feeds the other. So where I always suggest people start is, you've got to take stock of what your current state looks like. It's very easy to say we're not doing what we should, or maybe our platform or our technology is not where it should be. But you've really got to kind of outline what your vision is going to be as a company. You've got to understand what the customer journey looks like. And then within that, now it's the time to really dig in and understand current state. What are you doing at each of these moments of truth across the customer journey? Because what I found is, and we found this when we had this meeting in Chicago last week, is a lot of companies think they have a good understanding of what their customer experience looks like and how they're going out there and what kind of technology they're using. But if you take stock of all the stakeholders in your company, you're going to find things you didn't know existed. And so going out and trying to buy a new technology stack, or I want to switch from an emailed survey to an SMS survey, I wouldn't make those kind of changes until you really understand what current state is. And you're probably going to uncover some things you didn't know existed, some good and some bad. And then from there, I think it's all about breaking it out into phases, right? It doesn't have to be a binary all or nothing approach. We've talked about a lot of interesting things, using predictive analytics, using methods of interacting with your customer on their own terms, but it doesn't have to be all at one time. So break it out into digestible chunks where you feel like I can bring on a new way of interacting with my customers, and I can implement that, and I can be successful with that, because those quick wins are how your program is really going to change its landscape long term.
Okay, so we got the research side of improving the architecture. We've obviously got a vision of building a more flexible, more enterprise-wide technology platform. But what's the end game for the business? How do we go and make sure that this is not just about collecting more information, but really making an impact on the business?
Steve, that's a great question. I think a great place actually to end this discussion with, because you can go out there and implement a great strategy within a CX team. You can go out there and implement the best technology in the world. But those companies that I think really get it and really understand customer experience, selfishly, I'll give an example like JetBlue, where I did some of my work before Qualtrics, really gets it, is they really activate the front line and they activate the organization. So it's not about you as a CX team being great. To me, that's table stakes. How do you get all of these insights and this information out to your organization? So whether that's going through their cell phone, right? So mobile phones, mobile dashboards, that's where companies are really headed towards now and in the future. And it's also looking at what systems are people already working with, right? So we're talking about B2B here. CRM systems, right? There's a lot of work already being done there. People are already logging in. So why make them log into another system? Just integrate directly with that CRM, directly with like a Salesforce.com, and bring the voice of the customer directly to that. So just embed in the ways that your organization's already working. And that's how you're going to activate all levels of your company and be, honestly, as impactful as you could be.
Kyle, thanks a lot for being a guest on the podcast. Really enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, it was great, Steve. Appreciate the conversation.
My guest has been Dr. Kyle Groff, a PhD and a senior principal for global CX strategy at Qualtrics. Kyle, if our listeners wanted to get a hold of you, could you just give us maybe an easy way for them to contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. Always available through LinkedIn as my name, Kyle Groff. And then also I could be reached at kyleg@qualtrics.com.
Great. Thanks a lot. And if you want to talk about anything we discussed or how Walker can help your business customer experience, you can also contact me, steve.walker@walkerinformation.com, or call me here in the U.S. at 1-317-843-8890. Don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Kyle or anybody else here at Walker or Qualtrics if you think we could be helpful to you. We'd love to talk to you. If this is your first time listening, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Go to walkerinfo.com/podcasts to see all of our episodes, and subscribe via iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And our show notes page for this episode, we will have a link where you can check out our recent webcast, Building Your Customer Listening Architecture, where Kyle, along with Walker's own experts, discuss this topic. Thank you for listening to the CX Leader Podcast, which is a production of Walker. We're a business consulting firm that can help you make customer experience your biggest competitive advantage and help you put the customer at the heart of all your business decisions. Find out more at walkerinfo.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.